Hello, sixth graders. We are starting Unit 5. Our first lesson is on ratios. Our learning targets: I can create ratios to represent data, I can write ratios as percents and fractions, and I can compare ratios. Everybody should be using the note template, so find that and have that ready for you. Just something to think about here. What do all of these have in common, and how could you describe the relationship? So looking at these pictures, comparing diamonds to hearts, or comparing red tiles to blue tiles, or comparing girls to boys. What do all of them have in common? Vocab word. Anytime you see this, remember we write down the vocab word along with the definition. Our vocab word is a ratio. This is a comparison of two quantities by division, and they can be written multiple ways. We can write it down. This part you should include as well. If we had the ratio 3:4, we could write it like that, 3:4. Otherwise, we could use the colon, 3:4, or it can be written as a fraction, 3/4. So, and then write this part down as well. Ratios can express part to part, part to whole, or whole to part relationships, and are often written as fractions in simplest form. So now we're going to look at writing the ratios. So the first one here says, what is the ratio of rectangles to total shapes? So in this picture, when we're writing the ratios, the order is very important. Based on how the question asked, that's the order that we write our ratio in. So because this says rectangles to total shapes, that means when we write our ratio, rectangles should be first, total shapes next. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rectangles. To total shapes, there's 7, 8 total shapes. So we could write it like this, 6 to 8, and then a lot of times, again, we write it as a fraction in simplest form. Otherwise, with the colon as a fraction, which would simplify to divide them both by 2, which would be 3/4. So that means that for every 3 rectangles, there's 4 total shapes. Next one, what is the ratio of total shapes to triangles? So now this time, total shapes was listed first, so that would be the first number in our ratio. And I'm just going to write these as fractions. So there's 4 total shapes, and then the ratio to triangles, there's 2 triangles, so that would come second. Now we can simplify this, but we are going to keep these as improper fractions. Do not turn them into mixed numbers because ratios are comparing two numbers. So if we turned it into a mixed number, then it's no longer comparing those two. But we can simplify this to be 2/1, and we would keep it just like that. So that means 2 total shapes to every 1 triangle. Next one, at the store, the ratio of books sold to movies sold was 8:2. So this means that for every, because they say books, movies, that would tell us that books is first. So there were 8 books sold. Movies is second because movies was second here. So that means that there was 2 movies sold. Again, the order is very important. Or for every, now they switched the order on us. So they have movies listed, which was the second number. So there's 2 movies. Books was the first number, so 8 books. So in the sentence, we can switch it, but just remember which number goes with which item based on how it was listed first. So to set up a ratio, you need to know what numbers are being compared and then set that up in a fraction. So let's write this part down here. The first item listed is always going to be the numerator, the number on top. The second item will always be the denominator. Simplify, but make sure to leave it as an improper fraction. So write those 3 things down. Then we've got some questions here. Jane has a bag that contains 3 bouncy balls, 4 marbles, 7 books, and 1 orange. So it would be a good idea in your notes to write this information down so that when you have your questions, you know what you're referring back to. So the first one, write down books to marbles, and we're going to write that as a fraction. Well, there's 7 books, that's the first item, so that's going to be our numerator. There are 4 marbles, so that's our denominator. That cannot be simplified, and we're going to leave it as an improper fraction, so 7/4 is our answer. Next one, what is the ratio of marbles to books? Marbles comes first, so now that one would go on top. So there's 4 marbles. Books come second, so that's going to be our denominator. There are 7 books, so that goes on the bottom. Next question, and again, that's in simplest form. What is the ratio of bouncy balls to marbles? So bouncy balls is first, so that would be our numerator. Marbles is second, so that would be our denominator. So there are 3 bouncy balls, 4 marbles, and that's already in simplest form. Last one. What is the ratio of bouncy balls to total items in the bag? So bouncy balls is first, so that's our numerator. There's 3 bouncy balls. Total items in the bag, so that means everything. So we're going to add them together. So 3 plus 4 is 7, plus 7 is 14, plus the 1 is 15. There's 15 items in the bag. This can be simplified. So 1/5. So that means 1 bouncy ball for every 5 items in the bag. And again, remember, so write this down. Ratios that are greater than 1 are expressed as improper fractions, not mixed numbers. So keep your ratios as improper fractions every time. Okay, so here at this point, I want you to pause, try these on your own, and then come back and check your answers. So you're going to use the information in this table to write the ratios as a fraction in simplest form. So pause, try them, and then watch your way through. So the first one, adults to students. So there are adults is first, so that would be our numerator. So 24 adults. There are 180 students. Those are both divisible by 12. So if I divide the top and bottom by 12, 24 divided by 12 is 2, and 180 divided by 12 is 15. So in simplest form, 2 to 15. Next one, students to buses. So students is first, so that's our numerator, 180 students. There are 4 buses, so that's our denominator. So those are both divisible by 4. So when we simplify, 180 divided by 4 is 45/1. Again, keep it improper, so that tells us that there's 45 students per 1 bus. Next one, buses to people. So buses is first, there's 4 buses. Now people, that would be both students and adults. So we would add them together, which is 204. So that would be our ratio. Simplify though, we can divide both of those by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 204 divided by 4 is 51. So there are for every 1 bus, there are 51 people on that bus. Last one, adults to people. So there's 24 adults. People is second. Again, that's everybody, both adults and children. So that was our 204. And when we simplify that, they are both divisible by 12. So 24 divided by 12 is 2, and 204 divided by 12 is 17. So there's 2 adults for every 17 people. So now we're going to write ratios as both fractions and then turn them into percents. So let's first start by writing them as a fraction, and then we'll talk about how to turn them into a percent. So I'm going to just zoom out here for a second. If 5 cups of trail mix has 2 cups of raisins, what is the ratio of raisins to trail mix? Write as a fraction in simplest form. So it looks like we are comparing raisins to total trail mix. So there's 2 cups of raisins and 5 cups of trail mix. So our ratio would be 2/5. That's already in simplest form. Now, written as a percent. Here, let's write down these steps. This is how we change a fraction to a percent using a calculator. Divide numerator by denominator. So on my calculator, I'm going to go 2 divided by 5 equals, round to the nearest hundredth. So I got, I'm just going to write it up at the top here, that as my decimal. Then I'm going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right, 1, 2, add a 0 if necessary, and then add a percent sign, so 40%. What does this percent mean based on the situation? So since it was asking raisins to trail mix, it means that 40% of the trail mix is raisins. And that means then that 60% of it is the other stuff in the trail mix. Okay. So another one, we've got out of your 460 minutes on Zoom, this we were using for last year's information, 460 minutes on Zoom each week, you spent 70 minutes in math class. What is the ratio of math class minutes to total Zoom minutes? So as a fraction in simplest form, since math class is first, that's our numerator, which is 70 over 460. Those are, we're going to simplify, can both be divided by 10, which would be 7 over 46, and I think that's then in simplest form. So now turning that into a percent. Again, numerator divided by denominator, so 7 divided by 46, and we're going to get a decimal. Round to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 spots after the decimal. Move the decimal 2 spots to the right, add a percent sign, so 15%. So that means 15% of the Zoomed week was for math class. So this is where you would, again, pause, try these on your own, and then come back and rewatch. So the first one, on Saturday, Trey shoveled for 5 hours and played video games for 3 hours. What is Trey's ratio of playing video games to shoveling? So video games is first, so that's our numerator. As a fraction in simplest form would be 3 over the amount of time shoveling was 5. Turning that into a decimal, 3 divided by 5, which is this. Move the decimal 2 spots to the right, fill in with a 0. So 60% of the time was shoveling. Next one, currently Mr. Beast has 49 million subscribers on YouTube, and PewDiePie has 107 million. What is the ratio of Mr. Beast's subscribers to PewDiePie's? You can drop the million for now and just use the number value. So since they both have millions, we're just gonna leave that part off. So we wanna know Mr. Beast to PewDiePie's. So Mr. Beast was 49 million, so that's our numerator. And PewDiePie was 107 million. Again, we're leaving the millions off. You can just keep it like that. And I think that that's probably in simplest form. Turning that into a percent, 49 divided by 107, which is, again, to the nearest hundredth would be 46 hundredths. Move the decimal 2 spots to the right, 46%. Another vocab word here, so make sure you write down the vocab word with the definition. Equivalent ratios. They are ratios that have the same value. So last weekend, Miss Kraska drove 250 miles in 4 hours, and Miss Little drove 500 miles in 8 hours. Are these ratios equivalent? If not, who had the higher ratio of driving? So what I'm going to do first is write these both as fractions. I'm going to do miles, the miles over hours for both of them. Couple ways that we can do this. We could get them both to be simplest form. We could find common denominators for them. And then when we have them either in simplest form, we can determine there if they're equivalent, or we can find that common denominator. And then if we have the same numerator, then they would be equivalent. So I'm going to do that method because I know that 4 times 2 is 8. So if I multiply the top by 2 as well, so this would be 500 over 8, which in this case, that ends up being equivalent. So yes, that they are. If I had gotten them both to be a denominator of 8 and my numerators were different, then they would not have been equivalent. Or I could have simplified both of them, like I said, and then when they're in simplest form, if they have the same fraction, then they're equivalent. Next one, Mr. Hansen's cookie recipe calls for 2 cups flour to 8 cups sugar. Mr. Schaefer's cookie recipe calls for 8 cups flour to 14 cups of sugar. Are these ratios equivalent? If not, who had a higher ratio of flour to sugar? So I'm going to write these, let's see, flour, I'm going to do flour over sugar. So there's 2 cups of flour, 8 cups of sugar for Mr. Hansen, and Mr. Schaefer has 8 cups flour over 14 cups of sugar. I'm going to simplify both of these, and when they're in simplest form, let's see if they are equivalent. So that would be 1/4. These are both divisible by 2, which is 4/7. Now that they're both in simplest form, notice 1/4 and 4/7, those are not equivalent. So are they equivalent? No. If so, who had the higher ratio of flour to sugar? So who had the bigger fraction? Looks like Mr. Schaefer did, because that is more than 1/4. All right, this is where I would like you to pause and try this on your own and then come back and watch through to see if you did it correctly. So the question says, Morning Glory's Bakery sells 4 muffins for every 10 scones. Caribou sells 2 muffins for every 6 scones. Are these ratios equivalent? And if not, which has the higher ratio? So we're looking at ratios of muffins to scones. So I'm going to write them as a fraction, muffins over scones. And then for caribou, muffins over scones. Again, you could find common denominators for them, or we could simplify them. I'm going to do simplest form. So I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 2, which would be 2/5. This one, they can both be divided by 2, which is 2/3. Now that they're both in simplest form, we can see that they are not equivalent. 2/5 is not equivalent to 2/3, so no, they are not equivalent ratios. Which one has the higher ratio? So the bigger fraction would be this one, which is caribou coffee. Select 2 ratios that are equivalent to 6/10. So for this one, again, we could get them to simplest form, or we could see if we could get common denominators for all of them. I'm going to start by putting this into simplest form. They are both divisible by 2, which is 3/5. So we're going to be looking for fractions that are equivalent to 3/5 when simplified. So the first one for A, I'm just going to do this to keep my work organized, 20/12. If we simplify, I know that those are both divided by 4, which would be 5/3. That is not equivalent because the first number, 20/12, 20 has to be the numerator. If they were flipped and we got 3/5, it would be equivalent, but nope, 5/3 and 3/5 are not. 32/50, write it as a fraction. All right, to simplify this, I'm going to start with 2, which would be 16/25. I don't think that can be simplified anymore, so that is not equivalent to 3/5. This one is already in simplest form, 3/5, so yes, there's one of them. Next one, 24/40. Those are both divisible by 4, which would be 6/10. Which, look at right there, 6/10, that's what we originally were trying, so I'm not even going to simplify it anymore because I know that it is 6/10. Just to be safe, let's check 14/80. Start by dividing them both by 2, which would be 7/40, and I don't think that can be simplified anymore. So my 2 equivalent ones are C and D. Okay, so these you do questions, these are ones that you're going to try on your own. I'll be looking for them in your notes when I check them. That's the end of our ratios video, so look back, make sure that you have all of these things listed in your notes, the title, learning target, vocab words and definitions, all the examples with work to go with them. If you are a good way to check your understanding, could you explain this to somebody else? If not, rewatch parts of the video that you're still stuck on. Try more practice problems. Make sure to bring your notes to class. Cat is walking on my iPad. Have them at class with you.